Hey guys, it's Bert from Seasoned Gaming, and I did want to do a Nintendo controller comparison based on a request from one of our viewers. Now, Nintendo has released a bunch of great controllers throughout the last few generations, and I did want to cover the Pro Controller. So if you're looking for the standard controllers that come from Nintendo, these are not going to be the video that you're going to want to watch and the controllers that we're going to be talking about. So starting with the Nintendo Wii, the controller did launch with the Nunchuck and the Wiimote. So those were some of the weakest controllers, I would say, from Nintendo. However, Nintendo did kind of remedy this situation with the Nintendo Wii Pro Controller. Now, a lot of people like to use this Pro Controller for a lot of the Virtua Console games that were available later. So when you were playing your Nintendo, your Super Nintendo, and even some Nintendo 64 ROMs, a lot of people preferred this controller. Now, this was the Japanese controller. This is not a knockoff. This is an official Nintendo item. The main one that you've seen stateside of these is a black controller. The Wii Pro Controller was available in white and black in Japan. I actually opted for the white one because I wanted to match my Wiimote. So this was one of the better controllers that you could play some of the more hardcore games that needed a little bit more finesse on the controller. It did have a very PS3 type feel when it came to the joysticks. They were a bit far from apart, but I would say this was the preferred way to play a lot of the Wii software that didn't require motion. Now, this didn't have any extra motion things. You couldn't use this controller on the motion required games, but when it came to the controls that had a more precise control, this was the one to get. Now, it was technically wireless in the sense that it didn't control to the console. It controlled to the bottom of the Wiimote, and when you plug that in, you could simply throw your Wiimote to the side and then play with this controller. Now, the buttons have gone the exact same way that kind of the Wii U went. Your buttons did appear on the right side. Your joysticks are on the middle. However, they are on the bottom side. That's important to note. Your D-pad all the way to the left. And you did have your triggers on the top. So these are some of the better way to play a lot of the Wii software that is available. This does range today for about 50 to 60 bucks. I have seen some knockoffs on eBay though. And I will say, stay away from those. They're really cheaply made. The triggers on top, they do tend to kind of fall inside of the controller, and they actually stop working pretty early on. If you're looking for a cheap knockoff, go used with the Nintendo products. I will say there's also the Wii Motes and the Nunchucks that are available that have those. They offer all the Wii Plus options. Stay away from those as well. I've seen those as low as I think $10 to $15 for the entire Wiimote and the Nunchuck. There's a reason for they're that expensive, and I should say that cheap, so stay away from them. They're one of those cheap China knockoffs that I would recommend staying away and for far away from as you can. Let's go to the next generation that followed that up. So the Wii U came out, and it came with your giant pad. However, the Wii Pro Controller, I should say the Wii U Pro Controller, was one of the best controllers from last generations. You might have heard me talking about that in my last video that had all the controller comparisons from the last generations. Now, the Wii U Pro Controller is one of my favorites for a number of reasons. Number one, it's got great feel, great ergonomics. You can just hold this thing, and your fingers kind of conform to the controller in a great way. Now, this only takes about 6 hours to get a full charge, and the crazy thing is this thing will last you between 40 and 80 hours on one charge. I'm not exaggerating. I have seen people get closer to 50 to 60 hours on some of the games. Nintendo does suggest, though, that it is an 80-hour usage on that. Now, one of the other things that's interesting about it is lighter than the previous generation consoles and the current generation consoles. So going back to the 360 and the PS3, this was the lighter one. A lot of people kind of thought that it had less internals, and a lot of people think it doesn't have a rumble feature. The gamepad actually does have a rumble feature. It does depend on the game though, and there is a setting inside the Wii U that you need to actually turn on if it has been turned off. So these do come with a rumble feature. Once again, a lot of people thought it didn't, but it does. It is not the strongest rumble feature, I will say. It is stronger than the Wiimote rumble feature, which is kind of a quieter one. Some of the downsides to this is that it doesn't have the speaker that the Wiimote does have. So if you're playing a game that you rely on the sound from the Wiimote, this one doesn't have it. So this ends up being one of the better controllers from Nintendo of the recent generation. Now, a big change, or I should say a departure from what the Wii controller was, is that they ended up moving the joysticks to the top. If you look at Nintendo in history, they've had their joysticks all over the place. Remember the Seed stick? You had different things. The Wii U controller does bring them to the very top of the controller. Now, when you're used to playing on a PS3 or a 360, this was a big change. You had the two joysticks at the top, and you had to kind of adjust. If you remember, the PS3 controller had them at the bottom, and then the Xbox 360 controller had them offset. So your left joystick was up, and your right joystick was down. So you had to kind of adjust to that. The pressure sensitivity on these is kind of non-existent. It wasn't a technology that Nintendo adopted too much, so it's either all the way on or all the way off on some games. So keep that in mind when you're playing this. Once again, one of the best controllers from last generation. As far as the buttons go, you had your home button in the middle, your plus and minus, or your start and select buttons are going to be in the middle as well. So great controller. These go for about $60 new. They're still holding their value. You can find them on eBay from 40 to 50 bucks. However, I would just go for a new one if you can. If you can't afford it, go for a used one. But this is the best way to play a Wii U. So where are we today with Nintendo? So Nintendo is now with the Switch. And as it came out and as I kind of reviewed the Nintendo Switch and how I kind of don't really care for the Joy-Cons, even when you are using the controller ports and put it on and you have that complete, as I call it, the dog ears, I don't really care for that because obviously I'm not a kid and I do have bigger fingers and longer fingers. So when you're using the Joy-Cons, the top, the bumpers and the triggers are so close together that it makes some games kind of hard to play. Even after you're used to playing it for a while, it's really not that comfortable. The Nintendo Switch Pro Controller kind of fixes that. And what it does is it gives a better feel from where your actual index and your middle finger go if you use those for the trigger. Some people just use that. And it feels fantastic. I will actually put this up almost equal to the Xbox One controller and obviously ahead of the PS4 controller. I don't love the PS4 controller despite it being the main console that everybody's playing on. I prefer the Xbox One controller in between those two. And this Nintendo Switch Pro controller comes right in the middle of those. It also has amazing battery life. The Switch controller, Pro controller, they do say this one gets about 40 on a full charge. You're looking also at about 6 hours to fully charge this controller. And it does have the faster charging ability that it actually charges a tad bit faster than the Wii U. So you are going to kind of get that. Now, they did change things up again. So if you look at where the actual joysticks kind of land in all Nintendos, you have the original showing up at the very bottom. You have the Wii U showing up at the very top. And then Nintendo Switch did adopt the offset. So we have kind of noticed that the preferred way with the joysticks is the offset. Obviously, there's some people that prefer them at the bottom. Maybe you've been playing Sony consoles for a while. That might be your preference. Maybe you're a Nintendo guy and you've liked the Wii U Pro Controller. You're used to them at the top. So with them coming down to the offset side, that is a bit different. Now, another thing that's different about the Switch Pro Controller that the other controllers have is, that don't have, is the weight. The weight distribution on this thing feels really, really good. It's not too light, it's not too heavy, it's right where it needs to be. The other kind of interesting thing about all these controllers is that their battery is internal, so you always have to charge this. Obviously, this doesn't have a battery at all. This just plugs into the Wiimote, but you're kind of reliant on the Wiimote battery for that. It does have some textured grips at the bottom. These aren't as strong as the Elite controller for the Xbox One, but they do have a different texture and they do feel good in your hands. The joysticks, when you first get it, they have a tiny little click that you can feel when you move all the way to the left, and you can actually see and feel that click when you're playing games. You also have the new feature to where your actual joysticks click. So this in other consoles is called L3 or R3 when you click that. So that's kind of a new thing for Nintendo to an extent. So these had the clicks too, but the original Wii did not. There's no clicks on that. So this is kind of a newer thing in gaming. It adds an additional 2 buttons. So you have your clicks here, kind of nice. The D-pads, I will say, are almost identical between the Wii U and the Switch Pro Controller. So you're not getting any complete difference. I wouldn't be surprised if they almost use the same part for that, but it is pretty nice. Now, when it comes from an aesthetic view, I will say the Switch is a lot better than all these when it comes to the Pro Controller. If you look really close at it, it has kind of a translucent plastic, and you can almost see the motherboard. I think in some areas you can see the motherboard of the controller, and you do get kind of a Nintendo-looking feel when you look really close at this. There's an Easter egg on this, and I'll encourage you to find out what it is when you move one of these joysticks around. We'll talk about that later when it comes to cool Easter eggs when it comes to consoles. So this does have a great enhancement to the Nintendo Switch playability. The same with the Wii U with their Pro Controller, and I can't suggest this one enough if you're still a big Wii U player. Obviously, Wii U library is hit and miss for some people. The same with Wii U. However, the Wii U has some of my favorite titles from last generation, and the Switch is still to be determined if it's going to be a huge success when it comes to software that really take advantage of this. If you're always taking your Switch off the dock, obviously you're stuck with your Joy-Cons. You can still use this if you take the Joy-Cons off. I've actually taken this on a flight, and in flight I used this instead of my Joy-Cons because I preferred it so much, and it does work. So that is kind of one of the cool things about that. So that is our Wii U Pro Controller comparison. Why don't you leave in the comments which you like the best of them, what you don't like about them. I will say again, these are my favorite control options from the previous generations and the current generations from Nintendo. If you have any other comments or suggestions or controller comparisons you'd like to see, please let us know. Again, this was a viewer request to kind of have these compared, and thanks for watching.